This paper was presented at the JCT Traffic Signal Symposium 2025. Video coverage of this paper is provided by Highways News and sponsored by Mobius Networks, AGD, Smart Micro UK, TRL Software, Traffic Group Signals, AD Electronics, and 4-Way Consulting.
John just mentioned Jenny Martin there, and it was actually a throwaway comment Jenny came out with, I think 2 years ago when we were back in Nottingham, where she pointed out that actually if you were to pay consultancy fees for the knowledge that is shared on these days, it would be multiples of the amount of money that you spend to come to the symposium. And it struck us that we've got some really great minds that come to the event. But one of the things that in talking to John, he realised is everything is kind of like coming out from the stage to the audience with subjects that we have chosen, or John has chosen, to be interesting. But what about allowing the audience to ask questions? And we gloss over any mention of Mark Pleydell at this point. And so basically what we're looking for is to give you the opportunity for some experts to deal with here and now issues facing you. And as John put it a few weeks ago, we are democratizing the JCT Traffic Signal Symposium by letting you lead the discussions with your questions. Now, we have had questions that have been submitted beforehand, so we'll be bringing those to you through the next hour or so, but we will be having an opportunity for you to ask questions. So if something comes up, you can ask questions. You can't this time. You have to answer them, okay?
Can I ask the floor questions?
You can ask the floor questions in your answers, Mark, if you so wish. Now, one thing to say, unfortunately, Emily Madsen from Staffordshire is unable to be here this week because she's a bit poorly, so she hasn't been able to make the symposium at all. So we have a late substitute in Wendy. So thank you, Wendy Davidson, for joining us from TRL at the last minute to join the consultants, Mark Pleydell, Chris Kennett and Peter Routledge. So we will start off. I will quickly run through our panellists. Wendy is traffic engineer at TRL and a full-time chaos coordinator, she says, balancing life, learning and logistics with precision of a well-tuned scoot cycle. Biggest achievement was surviving 3 kids under 3. A dog lover and a reluctant weather forecaster, rarely seen without a muddy coat, a strong coffee and a soggy tennis ball. So our other guests here, Chris Kennett is director of Chris Kennett Consulting. The consultancy is now in its 6th year. He's the father of 2 highly sarcastic teenagers. I've been there, been through it, out the other side. I promise they do get nicer because, as they say with kids, every inch they grow, they lose a little bit of loveliness. But when they come out the other side, they're actually not bad again. He's into electronics and robots, hill walking, and this is where I meant to ask how on earth I should pronounce, is it trebuchets? Trebuchet, not bad.
Right place for it.
Okay, yes. Helping local scouts build those. And Peter Routledge, who is director of Ian Routledge Consultancy, has been in the industry now for 20 years. I seem to remember Ian winning the ITS UK Young Professional Award many, many, many moons ago when, well, I still had hair. He's now over 40, so he's not so young anymore. He's also involved in Scouts. He's been a Scout leader for more than 10 years and finally climbed Snowdon this year with the goal of the Yorkshire Three Peaks next year. And Mark Pleydell, he's been 31 years in the industry, 17 of them running PTC, delivering technology, knowledge and solutions to clients in the UK and further afield. He's a director and management board member of Topaz, a chartered physicist, and his hobbies include getting stung a lot, jarring up honey, bothering colonies of bees and asking questions at the JCT Traffic Signals Symposium. So
that was ad-libbing, Paul.
There you go. Let us move on to the first of our questions, which comes from Charles Taylor, Senior Engineer Design at Transport for Greater Manchester. Charles suggests that autonomous vehicles are becoming more common. Well, whether they're becoming more common, we've got to be thinking about them at least. How do you see road design, traffic signal design, and traffic signal control evolving through those years? And how soon do you expect the changes to take place? Who would like to pick up on that one?
Okay. So in terms of road design, I think we start with first. It should become more predictive. More autonomous vehicles, easier turning circles. So they should be predictive turning circles. So that should make road layout design slightly easier. Traffic signal design is going to be about data, isn't it? We're going to be looking for more data, more input, and we're going to get more feedback, which should, again, make that process better. And then what was the last one?
So we talked about road design, traffic signal design, and traffic signal control.
And control, yes. Again, it's all about data. The more data that we can feed into systems and the more data we can feed into designs, the more comprehensive those designs are going to be. Mark, I can see you itching too.
Apart from observing that Chris Kennett is camouflaged against the background, please notice he is there. I'd like to pick up on the signal control part of that, if I may. We're seeing, and talking to Pete Sim of Mobius today, he's saying that business is booming. That tells us that a lot more information is being moved from where to where and why. And I suggest that we could see signal controllers having their functionality partitioned into functions at the roadside, which are essential, the safety and a few control strategies which you need, and then the complex stuff being moved out and run, as Wendy said, using lots of data, doing the sophisticated things away from the roadside. So I think if Howard, we went from cams and motors and microprocessors yesterday afternoon, I think possibly the next step is to see the advent of comms beginning to partition controllers and move their functions in different directions.
Don't disagree at all. In terms of road design, I think something that may be a little bit of an anathema, if I can get my words out and say that, to us all, I think road design and junction design may be forced to simplify. I think it's going to be a very, very long, slow road, I think, to fully autonomous vehicles. Connected vehicles were already there, really, but they are going to evolve, and I think autonomous vehicles are a long way off. We are going to have decades where humans have to drive on roads every day and increasingly mix with cars and other vehicles that are fully autonomous, and that they're going to have to get on together and be able to understand and predict what each other's going to do. And part of that will be responding to the environment that we build and we design over the coming years. In order to facilitate that, I think we may get to a point where we find certain things just don't work because the level of complexity can't be coped with by both humans and autonomous vehicles. And so the compromise is we make things simpler, and the radii, the junction radiuses, simplify, standardize, make maybe signal arrangements simpler, more straightforward, easier to machine learn, but also for drivers who increasingly have less experience and fewer of them driving, maybe for them to be able to follow.
And if I add on to that, there are already European specs like MAPM that structure how a network should be structured and communicated. Everything we've seen, or a lot of what we've seen in the automated space currently, relies on vehicle telemetry and cameras and everything else. And I've always cynically said to people, why do they test a lot in California? Well, the weather's predictable and the road markings are good. Sling it through bits of York where the geography and topography and lack of road markings and what have you, it's a different kettle of fish. And as has been said by my colleagues, until the very last vehicle is driven autonomously, then you can't realise a large chunk of the benefits that could exist. We don't have the capacity as a country to go into a two-tier system, not even saying we would want to, but do we end up with roads that become autonomous only? You know, certainly in Africa, with like cellular technologies, they've leapfrogged. There's no copper networks. They've gone straight to stuff. So other places may leap ahead of us and we may end up following.
Yeah, okay.
Interesting stuff. Just to let you know, we will come to questions from the audience later and also comments. So rather than comment as we're going, which will get a bit clunky, we'll rattle through some questions and then we can have some questions from you in a few minutes' time. I think I first came to the Symposium 10 years ago. It was either 10 or 11, I can't remember. And I think the key thing that's really, really changed in the importance in presentations has been the amount we've talked about active travel, pedestrians, cyclists, compared to how much we maybe had the odd mention in the odd paper 10, 11 years ago. So this is a really interesting question from Zach from Active Travel England, which I think will go to Mark first of all, which is, which traffic signal type is missing from our allowed TSRGD suite that would be the most useful or present the most opportunities were it to be introduced?
Am I allowed 3?
Sorry, even if I said no, he'd do it anyway. Of course you are, yes.
Well, let's go down the route of something that the department has sort of talked about on and off for a while. I'm not speaking for them, let's make that really clear. The department's been trying to remove pelicans from our network for a very long time, but like Trigger's broom, they're still out there. Because the flashing amber provides an opportunity. It provides an opportunity for energy saving, and it provides an opportunity for simplifying signalling systems at certain locations. So that's my first one. The second one is, and I'm sorry, Pete, I know this is a bit of a pet hate of yours, indicative green arrows. Yeah? There you are, in the box, waiting to make the turn. Yeah? You've got the arrow, it goes out. Or you haven't got the arrow and you're waiting for it to come up, and there's nothing coming towards you. Do you make the turn? Do you know, well of course you don't at the moment, what the signal facing the other way is doing? In France, in Paris, I've noticed that on the back of the primary signal heads, they put a repeater, just for the red, and it comes up as a cross, so it's clearly not a primary signal. But to know what the back of that signal was telling you before you made that call may improve safety at something that makes a few people uncomfortable. So that's my second one, and at the risk of hogging the question completely. The third one is ramp metering. We use it on motorways, on slips, to merge things. There are other places we could use it. What would, for example, a ramp metered entry onto a large roundabout look like? Could you improve capacity and throughput? And I throw that one out there, and if anyone's got any thoughts, I'd be really interested. But those were the three that, and at this stage.
Oh, you go.
Okay. For me, I mean, the main one that I wanted, I'm lucky enough that I got it nearly over 10 years ago, 12, 13 years ago, when we got DFT approval for the project that I was delivering at the time for the first, as it turns out, legal, but the first legal green cycle filter. And that at the time, I thought was brand new until I discovered that there'd been one for about 20 years in York. But we got it, and that's now in DMRB, and it's brilliant. It's really useful, and then combined with the low-level cycle aspect. So actually a lot of that we've got. I don't think there's one particular signal, but what I would like to see is a lot more work done on how we use those, making them simpler, easier. I think a lot of it is still confusing. There's a lot of signage that goes with the usage of these things. And I think they are more complicated than they need to be, which is a downside for everybody, and it's a block to adoption. So what I'd like to see is us and a little bit of DFT working together to actually simplify how we use those and make them more flexible, more usable, and much easier to understand for pedestrians and cyclists.
I'm going to take Mark's lead, and I have 3. Well, there's a variation on the theme. So the first one is actually to do with weight lamps, believe it or not, and it's more swaying out of TSRGD, but I still cannot believe we're in a world where the failure state of the inability to cross the road is the exact same signal you're given when your demand is pending. And if we're talking about active travel, how on earth is that a solution? And I've talked with multiple people here how much love I have for the Swedish Prisma unit with its on-the-top vibration unit, which is slow pulses when it's demand's latched and quickly when it's at green. But lots of other neat other touches like arrows and stuff that tell you the direction of the crossing. So not really a sign, but it's of it. The second one, and I know it's been trialled and there'll be learned people in the audience who'll tell me why it's a bad idea. But obviously red and amber arrows have been tried previously. Now, we see designs where there is an opportunity to run the ahead traffic with a ped over the side road in lieu of a left turn. But you have to obviously be extremely careful how people pass the information. A red arrow left is very clear that you cannot go that way, you're not interpreting the other signals. So, I don't know, has the time for the arrow come again? Yeah. There you go, right, that's good, people agree. And then the third one is a TSRGDism, so specifically less ways. We see a lot of very poor quality but well-intended cycle design because there isn't actually enough examples that in TSRGD that now cover the permutations. And where the examples do exist, it might be the combination of this with that with the other, or where the stratification between a parallel cycle stream and a ped stream. So I think whether it's a TSRGD thing or it's whether it's an extension of Chapter 6, more so, you know, the picture book of Chapter 6, the Ladybird book of options, you know.
Wendy, any thoughts?
I think I have to go with Ian there. The one thing that I would go for is the arrows, the arrows, the red and amber arrows for me. I just think that makes such a difference, removes ambiguity and makes it more straightforward.
Okay, right. Next question, Richard Dolphin from across the Pennines at Transport for Greater Manchester. He's Group ITS Engineer and says, traffic signal controllers haven't really fundamentally changed since microprocessor controllers were introduced. What do you think the future is for traffic signal controllers, and are there any changes that can be made that will improve road safety and traffic efficiency? Let's go to TRL first, shall we?
Okay. That's a difficult one. Where do I think it's going to go? I think we're talking about V2X, so I think there's going to be communication between controllers. I think that's going to, where we're talking about the data exchange and the way forward, I can see that that's what we're going to be looking for the controllers to do. So there's going to be more smart communication in those controllers. Again, going back to the data, more data within those controllers to allow them to make those intelligent decisions that we're now talking about, a lot about AI. I think that's, you're going to see that moving to the controller away from the in station, but handled on the street. So it can be more reactive to the information and the data that holds there potentially. There are lots. I think there's huge potential for where controllers could go.
Okay.
Could I actually slightly disagree with the premise of the question, but not in a bad way, and actually touching on what Howard talked about yesterday, because I spoke to him last night and I pointed out that he's missed one of my favourite controllers, which was the pedestrian crossing Plessy 110, which I still to this day have a read-write key for, and absolutely, as an absolute nerd, love the setting of the dials to set the address, turn the key, set the value, press the big red plunger button to adopt it. That's what the first microprocessor controllers were, and how they came into the industry, that and the other ones of a similar vintage. The handset ports came next. We now have, and I mean, again, I was on 2012 talking about Linux being in all of our signal controllers. All our signal controllers were computers. That is the same to this day. There are text editors built into some of the equipment we're using that you can write text in if you, for some reason, wanted to. And it's theoretically possible, not a good idea, but you can actually use command line text editors to reconfigure it from text. It's not intended. That's just how the nature of the equipment has evolved and changed over the years. It is going to still, I'm certain it will still keep evolving. But I think what we'll probably see is now stratification of those layers. I think we'll probably see decentralization. We're already seeing that with things like ++, before that RLCS, and many, many years ago, a nice chap called Marek, who a few people might know, whisked me to one side and showed me a little board which ran all these traffic lights over Ethernet cables, and that was before any of these. I think we will see more of the same. I think decentralization, stratification, and then that will bring in all those other tools and techniques.
I'm going to get in before Mark, because I know this will be dear to him subject, but Mark already alluded to the stratification of the safety layer away from control and optimization and APIs. The word no one said yet is cybersecurity. They are all computers at the side of the road. Theoretically, depending on the kernel they're running, they would all probably fail any kind of assessment of the security of the devices. And invariably, maybe what we end up with is a very hardened safety layer at the side of the road, and we have to abstract the intelligence away and fall back to a minimum safety thing just to satisfy the way the world is moving, particularly with V2X. Much more of an edge-based processing possibly, but certainly not as much roadside optimization because of the data that we get fed in and squirted around.
Okay. Mark?
Pause for breath. Picking up first on what Wendy was saying and something that I said at the Movie User Group on Tuesday, within Topaz there is currently work on detection standards, which is fine, but we have to remember that those detectors are there to inform, firstly, signal controllers and then beyond that, other equipment. So the data flowing into a controller is increasing. Where it goes after that is a separate matter. Similarly, 2500, that very loved standard that we've all got used to working with, is about to go through a major overhaul. If you look at the structure of 2500, there's a block of core functionality at the top, above which there are European standards which the UK has adopted for safety, but there are core standards for things like startup sequences and some fairly elementary traffic control functionality. Then there is a raft of appendices for different types of control mode or functionality. And because of the life cycle of equipment in this sector, our standards have to recognize and support 20-year-old functionality while trying to accommodate what's going to come in 20 years' time, because if it goes in the ground now, that's how, excuse me, that's how long it will be around for. So I think the question is incredibly timely, and I would very much like to see this audience contribute to that review process, because we're going to see, I think, controllers evolve, and we've had variations of it across the panel, the partitioning of different levels of functionality for different purposes, and whether we abstract, as comms gets better, it doesn't all have to be in the cabinet. And if it's not all in the cabinet, perhaps you've taken the cost down, which is fairly key at the moment. So it's not just technical balances and security balances, there are the economic and commercial considerations. So that's not a simple answer, but those are all factors that are going to shape what controllers look like.
Okay, really good stuff. Also, anyone that tells you that the JCT Traffic Signal Symposium is not a niche event, I don't believe I've ever been to an event where somebody has talked about their favourite controller before. Now, let's just move on. I'm just going to open up questions. If anyone's got a question or a comment now, we'll come to you. Otherwise, we'll rattle on with the next question. Yep, just there, please. If you can say who you are, where you're from as well, please.
Howard Sapper, Sheffield, not Sheffield. Anyway, interesting. I mean, in terms of controllers, I'm surprised that we're not talking about increased functionality as well. We've heard about different strategies of control or tactics of control, like inflow, and in the past, like Lothra. And I think that, and also the opportunity to move between scoot and mover, engineers ought to be able to have the option of possibly moving between different types of control modes. We've not really had any increased control modes, well, since LRT, I suppose. Bus priority came in. But there should be more options available for different circumstances, and I would have thought that would be possible.
Okay. Everyone points at Chris.
You're going to get 4 answers, Howard.
I think they are around. I do think this goes hand in hand to some extent with that stratification and moving elements of it outside the controller, because these systems are around, but they're not necessarily in directly in the controller. They're talking to the controllers. They're running alongside. For many years, Mover wasn't really recognised as a mode of control. It mimicked UTC. It uses the UTC interface. I mean, Viva City, just to do some name checks, Viva City have experimented with control of controllers via their own back office, via their smart sensors. That's been done. I've been involved with an American company in the past who were looking at that. They're not in the UK, they've not come to the UK, but they've experimented, and we did get as far as one trial site out on a UK site. There are other exhibitors, Inflow from Smorco. That's in place. Leeds has got, and in fact across Yorkshire in various places, there are a range of, I think probably familiar with some of them, but a range of different systems at different layers and different levels. Some of them strategic, some of them implementing plans that Joel was been talking about, all at different levels. I don't think we recognise them as modes of control anymore, because we've started seeing them as more distinction, more nuances, and also because they're being sold as products largely, rather than a unified mode of control. So but I think they are with us. I think they exist. I think we're using them in places.
I can't say anything other than completely agree. I think it's what you said, though, is the UTC layer and the force bits, and maybe that's the protection, isn't it? That allows that experimentation in the space on the basis the controller should always fail safe.
So if I can finesse that, we all use phase and stage-based control structures for moving the traffic through the network. Because we do that, and because the time constant, the underlying responsiveness that you need for traffic is comparatively slow compared with processing speeds, we can push the instructions to make changes, given the boundaries set by TSM Chapter 6 and so on. We can push the instructions to make changes to the signals by any means we want now. And there was the faintest hint in Darren Capes's presentation yesterday morning of the outside possibility of a little bit more money. Now, ITMF was Intelligent Traffic Management Fund. So there we have it. That's the application of funding from the department to trying out strategies, trying out other ways of actually, via the controller, implementing control on the network. So I think, Howard, the answer is sort of, provided we retain an appendix which says these are the force bits and these are the G bits and a few other useful bits in there as well, then where you prod the controller from to make it work its way through the stage sequence kind of doesn't matter so much. Those labels, Pete and Chris said, are fading away. Sorry, Wendy, that's probably your territory.
I think that's absolutely it. It's, I mean, you're talking about within the controller, the control modes within the controller.
It doesn't matter the mechanism.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Excellent. Right, I'm going to do a couple of quick-fire questions now. I think this one really comes to you, Mark. It comes from Keeley Franklin on behalf of one of the members of ARTSM. So, as you know, Keeley Franklin's ARTSM CEO and administrator for Topaz, and the question relates to the purpose of Topaz. And what it says is, I think people have forgotten that previously to Topaz, no product was permitted to be on the road without Secretary of State type approval. If people choose to ignore the process of Topaz, and Keeley talked about this on my Highways Voices podcast yesterday, and we ran a story on it on Highways News, what is the risk to authorities? Basically, if you're not putting approved stuff on your network, I guess it's all fine until it isn't. And then what's the risk?
Okay, you've already done half of my work for me, thank you, Paul. Let's think about it like this. We heard the analogy of an MOT earlier today as being a way of looking at tuning up a site. Would you go to a dodgy garage to get your car fixed because the bloke behind in the grubby overall says, yeah, because I can do that for you? Or would you rather someone had independently validated that the equipment you were using was fit for purpose against recognised standards? And given that there are recognised standards, which
Absolutely. Right. Anyone else want to pick up or should we carry on? Right, well, okay. The next question, we're mixing up Radio 4 programmes because the next question, some of you will get, comes from Mrs. Trellis of North Wales. And this is then followed on to another question. But Mrs. Trellis of North Wales says, we've heard mention of DCIS, Digital Controller Interface specification. What's the latest? And then Joel Dodsworth from Leeds City Council, so right here, the UTMC manager here, says, when are we likely to have confirmation of the data structure for DCIS? Some certainty is required to enable development of new innovations, such as those required to prepare for connected vehicle technology. There is plenty of appetite within local authorities and suppliers to innovate and develop in that area, but we're somewhat hamstrung at the moment. Is it a case of additional funding required from DFT? I can't see if Darren's in the room or not, actually. Who'd like to pick up on that?
Mark and I are looking at each other going, who's going to take that one? I'll tell you what, we'll do what we did before. I'll take it and Mark can finesse the grubbiness of my answer.
Before you do, can I just say, the answer to the very last part of the question is yes.
Yeah,
right.
that's a given.
That was the more money bit, just so everyone, you know.
Is Darren in the room? Right, so I can say whatever I want. Right, ultimately, Darren delivered a paper yesterday. And Aaron has to walk a very fine line, as we all know, because who will be the Transport Secretary next week? However, there was a huge hint. DCIS was mentioned on, the first proper slide. So it's there. But then there was a big part about connected vehicles and the policy direction. So I think and obviously speak to Darren quite regularly, it's what the department, they clearly do is they're setting out, all these things move at different speeds. An automotive world is moving at an incredible speed, but we've already referenced a couple of times, we might be in a 15 to 20 year cycle. It was always said historically, the car you buy brand new, that is the brand new model, its tech was already 5 years old because it takes that long to go through the process. So whereas now things are speeding up even more. So the process, what we're trying to do is get as many of the sort of things in place, setting out the space for things, so that, I've said this to Mark, said this before, was the Greek proverb, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, the second best time is today, but also those societies grow great when people plant trees whose shadow they won't sit under, because these things are not going to be quick. So the question is, when is there going to be clarity? Those who've seen the DCIS papers before know that DCIS is more than one thing. It is a standard to encapsulate things as what, I'm going to say this is going to Mark will laugh, and as simple as a unique number for every site, which would be simple if we're not constrained by the overarching European referencing scheme we have to use. So a lot of these bits are in place, and almost the further we go down in the complexity, the less well-formed the answer is at this time. But as Mark said, money will help speed up surety. So if he was here, I'd say Darren, come on. But also that we are reasonably comfortable that the space is we're well defining the space. Yes, it would be nicer to be able to go, and it's going to be exactly like this, but we already have, there's been documents on the Simonite number. Obviously, it feels almost inappropriate not to mention Simonite whilst here.
Absolutely.
And there is guidance out there, and there have been trial candidates. There are people in this room who've done it and looked at different methods for it. MAPM is already, as I said, that is part of the DC stack. It's an established European spec. The difficulty there is almost how you build it for your network. And then the third part being E2500 ties beautifully in with what Mark said about the rewrite for future 2500 part of it. And this is actually, like, as Mark and I discussed this, there is a opportunity. These things actually feed into each other. A big part of 2500 is the what and not the how. which is actually a really good thing, but then can also lead to divergence of ways when we come back to the same outcome, and how that can then be represented in such a way that it can be a standardized thing that supports the comms and structured data. And that's why there is 2547, 2545. I got my numbers right. That's good. So because people are identifying these needs. So I'd love to give a Joel an answer and say it'll be a week on Thursday, but it is sooner rather than later, and it's just we can only consider indulge us, get involved, badger Darren, badger the DFT, and this is the first an opportunity to do so.
Mark?
May I think the quickest way to get to the end of this question is to ask the audience how many people have heard of DSIS. Oh, no, how many people have not heard of DSIS? Don't be afraid to put your hands up. Okay, there are two in the middle there I'd expect not to have done, that's fine. Digital Controller Interface Standard is an attempt to represent traffic signals, signal-controlled locations across the UK. We've been tasked with three outputs. The first output, just exactly how many signalised locations are there, and can we uniquely identify each one? Colloquially, the ISD, the intersection summary document. Each authority is going to be asked to produce one. Pete's already alluded to the MapM information. The MapM file is the topography of the site, lanes in, through the conflict zone and out again, and the placement of the signals that control those traffic movements. The third part, the E2500, which is the bit where Pete and I spend a lot of time talking to each other and developing this, is an attempt to standardise the configuration information for each specific site, rendering it into a JSON format, which can be consumed by, well, pick a use case. There are many, many use cases. The development of that JSON, which is the configuration information in a controller, is largely the static stuff. But over the top of that, there's a layer of things that are changing all the time. Yes, we know that Glossa gives us time to green or whatever, but that's just one of the parameters you can extract from a controller that might be useful. Just to know where you are in a green is of itself quite a valuable thing. And what Joel was alluding to in his question is, will there be a standard format for outputting that dynamic content? And the answer to that is, we have got a reasonably complete static form for the controller configuration, as far as we've got. And as Pete said, we're in a space where we feel reasonably comfortable. There aren't huge unknowns. What we want to do is, having got that shape, overlay it in the same pattern with the dynamic elements of information that can then be read out of the controller, so that the controller will be able to publish not only its static state, its config, but its dynamic state as well.
Okay. Now, what I'm going to say is that it was interesting how many people hadn't heard of DSIS in here, even in a room full of people who have favourite controllers. Therefore, the joys of owning your own news website and owning your own podcast means that I can choose what goes on and in it. So consequently, what I'll do is I'll drag you, and we'll get Andy Graham in as well,
yep.
And we'll do a full podcast in a good half hour, really getting into some more of the detail of DSIS, and I'll get that published in the next few weeks, and keep an eye, and I'm sure John will share it with you through JCT as well as being on Highways News. So
May I add one little postscript? All of those that receive TSOG funding will be encouraged to produce their ISD. Please badger your asset managers, service providers, because they almost certainly have all the raw material, and it's a, forgive me if you're going to be in this, I'm putting you in the frame now, it's a relatively straightforward process to consolidate that into the standard form of the ISD. And several of the authorities that we tried this out on turned the handle very quickly and very successfully on this, so we know it can be done.
Okay, thank you. Is Ethan Baxter in here?
Up here.
Okay, excellent. Right, Ethan asks the next question. And what's interesting is his job title says Trainee Engineering Technician, and we can cross out trainee because as of Monday this week, he's no longer a trainee. So I think that deserves a round of applause. He works with Chris and asks a question, is it better to maximise efficiency and capacity at a site or better to reduce the number of complaints? An interesting one. We'll start with Chris because you might have a sort of more background to the question.
I do. It's been a point of discussion. I'm not sure that I have an answer. Certainly not a simple answer, which is I suspect why Ethan put this question in for the rest of the panel. It's certainly something we've come across, and that is the optimum solution in terms of pure numbers is not necessarily the optimum in terms of public acceptance. This maybe goes in, and actually in some ways ties in maybe with things like red arrows, amber arrows, things like that, which maybe could help. But as we have over decades made more complex sites, clever staging strategies, got more traffic through, there comes a point, again, with complexity to some extent, where yes, we are getting the traffic through quicker, but at the expense of the public failing to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. I see that with Mover. When Mover detects exit blocking and a failure to efficiently use its green time, its response is to end that green time so that it doesn't waste time and move on and elsewhere. Now, when you've got that situation, the guaranteed response from the member of public sat in a car at the stop line who was exit blocked, but who's just lost right of way is, well, if it had stayed green, then the queue would have cleared and I'd have got through. So the technically correct answer doesn't give the response that the public wants to see. I don't know. I don't know. There's a balance to be had. I think that's all I can really. But
we're running quite short on time, and I've got a couple more questions. So quick answers from the rest of you, please.
Steve Gooding. We're up to about 40,000 vehicles in this country, up from
40 million.
40 million vehicles.
If only 40,000.
Sorry, 40 million vehicles. I did some similar stuff a few years ago. I think over the last decade, the amount of road mileage in the UK increased by about 10% over the decade. So we have lots more vehicles on not a great deal more road. It's not really surprising that we've got issues and motorists, road users have problems. Complaints are about individual journeys. Efficiency is about network management. You have two opposed forces in play there.
Wendy?
I don't think there is any one answer, if I'm honest. I think it depends on the site. I think it depends on the policy. I think it depends on what you're trying to accommodate. And I think it's on a per site basis. It's maybe not even a per authority basis. So I don't actually think there is one answer to that question. I think each site is individual, and you'll have to consider the needs of that site individually to determine whether you go with the complaints or you go with the throughput.
Yeah, I can't add anything to that. I'd turn it to the room and say, for those who manage traffic, you'll give me a list of sites where efficiency matters and a list where complaints matter. And it depends which councillor, or all that kind of thing. The other bit I'd say that's missing from the equation, though, is, it was quite some time ago, where a gentleman said to me, my kid's being taught at school that every crossing has an audible. Like, no. The education piece is lost. There used to be the Green Cross Code. There used to be a lot more positive DFT pushing of education. You know, the amount of times I've had people do not understand with a right turn indicative arrow that they have to move into the junction, so Mover doesn't then demand the right turn, and then I nearly got assaulted in a car park in Kirkcaldy about this, and I decided the better part of valour was not to attempt to explain to the gentleman, say, I'm fixing it. But it was, so it's also about an expectation piece. We can say the complaints, but if the people, because of the complexity, don't understand, then we're already half lost.
This is a perfect segue into a question that's come in, and I love this because Luke, who's sitting up here filming this, has no background whatsoever in the industry. I mean, he does things like work on The Voice and in theatres and things, yet he's been coming to the Symposium now for many, many years, to the point where I'll be at home and I will get ranting text messages from him about problems with Greater Manchester's road network, because he now knows so much about it from having sat here listening to it through the years. And he sent me a question which is on that point of education. He says compliance of signals by both drivers and pedestrians appears to be slipping, at least that's his observation in Greater Manchester. We see big campaigns by National Highways to educate drivers on, say, the use of smart motorways, that sort of thing. Do we need a similar thing to remind drivers of the basics in towns and cities?
Yes. I mean, look at the change in the highway code to do with almost the formalisation of the priority of pedestrians across side roads and turning vehicles. I still treat it as a pedestrian as I did before because I don't trust anyone else. You know, it's the motorcycle logic. Assume everyone else is trying to kill you.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. So it's
Brilliant.
and also Richard's in the room, Luke, so I'm sure you could nobble Richard Dolphin.
Any more questions from the audience? I've got one more on my list, but we've got time for a question or comment if anyone wants to make any, or I can move on. Got one here. It's Margaret.
We're getting bullied by
Margaret
the
and your
old guard.
40,000 vehicles on the road.
It was actually in respect of the very first question, and that was Paul and I had the privilege of experiencing a ride in Sunderland in an autonomous bus, and we were very impressed. But there was one thing that not unnerved me but worried me was the fact that, and as I understand it, they use the 2-second rule but increase it to 2.7 seconds when the bus stops at a red light. And the upshot of this is that the distance between the front of the bus and the back of the vehicle in front was long enough to fit in another car. So my thoughts were that if this was sort of extrapolated over lots of autonomous buses, then you're going to lose a lot of storage capacity within the network. So the sort of question or suggestion is it the right time to start going back to basics and going back to what TRL, which when it was RRL, and have demonstrations of vehicles driving around the 8, the loop, and they did trials of different types of junctions and roundabouts and priority intersections, and had cars driving around the figure of 8 to set up experiments that led to the basics of junction design and signal control, Webster and Cobb, and so on. So should we be perhaps looking towards such demonstrations with autonomous vehicles mixed up with ordinary vehicles as a first step, and then increasing the flows of autonomous vehicles? Anyway, just a thought. Back to basics.
You've gone straight to the end of autonomy. Connected is the first interim step. The vehicle that you're referring to can only rely on its own telemetry, typically. The autonomous step, you would assume, would go a long way towards the vehicle in front being able to communicate what it's doing and thus lower those gaps. But in terms of what you're saying about back to basics, I think the poem was asked about the geometry, and I'll let someone else have the opportunity.
But I mean, generally, what I was thinking of, that is it not the time to actually observe the interactions?
So for those that are outside and can't hear that, is it time to actually observe the interactions?
I'm probably not well placed to answer that, but I think to a degree that's already been done from the number of YouTube clips put out by tech companies and tech firms that, for example, I think a very well-known one with a fully automated car herring around a car park on top of a building in between cones and dashing in and out. Now, there's problems with that, not least the amount of it that was actually faked. And also it's been done by the vehicle manufacturers because they're so far ahead. So I think that's been done and is being done and has already been done, but what hasn't been done is then looking at the junction design, and that goes back to, I suspect the answer is simplify the junctions to make them able to make better decisions.
Okay, I've got one last question because we're out of time, sadly, and this is, we were worried whether or not we had given ourselves too long, and clearly we could have gone on loads more, so we're going to bring in another panel show thing of fingers on buzzers. Whoever wants to answer this first, from Richard Bishop, Technical Director of SLR Consulting, says, why do design rules on entry path curvature for priority roundabouts apply to signalised roundabouts? Okay.
Buzz. Sorry to argue, I'm not sure that they do, or at least I'm not sure they always do. I don't think, and please anybody correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there is any design standard that sets out a signalled roundabout as a specific thing. That's my thing. Are large gyratory interchanges roundabouts? No, unless you want them to be. There are definitely cases where CD123 geometric design of traffic signal junctions is the right application and the right use of DMRB on a gyratory system network, and I don't think that's necessarily limited by size. I think that's limited by how it's used or how it will be used, and therefore the designer needs to infer that. However, if the signals go off, how will it be treated then? That's where you need to consider the roundabout guidance and design. So it's okay while the signals are on, but what happens when they're off? But different circumstances, different junctions, different standards, and also if it's urban, Traffic Science Manual Chapter 6.
Brilliant. Right, thank you. I'm afraid that is, as they say, all we have time for. Now, when John and I discussed this on the podcast that went out yesterday morning, we said this could fall flat on its face or it could be brilliant. And I think thanks to our panellists and your questions, it has been brilliant. Thank you ever so much to Peter, to Chris, to Wendy for stepping in at the last minute, and to Mark. Thank you for your questions, for making this an excellent session, and please a huge round of applause for our panellists.